Welcome to the Let's Actuate podcast interview series, where we speak to leaders in VC, venture building, and future technologies, and we discuss the current state and trajectory of their domains. Let's dive in. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Welcome back to the Let's Actuate podcast. Got a fun one for you. This is not a building in public episode. This is actually our ramp up of our interview series again. So very excited to be diving back into that. And we have a great conversation lined up for you with Zain Premji, who is the co-founder and chief strategy officer at SQS, which is Secured Quantum Services. They are a quantum computing company, but I'm going to let them get into the details about that because it's pretty exciting. How you doing today, Zain?
I am doing great. It's been a good week work-wise, and it's nice to just have a conversation about what we all do on a Friday. So looking forward to it.
Beautiful. Sounds good. Yeah, we're looking forward to it as well. And there's some aspects of your history and your transition into being a co-founder at the startup. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, where you all started, and then how you got to where you're at today?
Yeah, sure. No, it's a fun one. So I was born and raised in England, and I moved to the States mainly back in 2010 or 11, I want to say, where I was finishing up my studies. So I had some family in Texas, so I chose the institution of Texas A&M University, College Station, Texas. Bit of a culture shock coming from England to College Station. A lot of pickup trucks and two-step dancing, which I had to get used to. But I got my degree there in economics and got behind the Aggie spirit, and really obviously got into the curse of being a Texas A&M college football fan. So still hurts to this day. But after I got my degree, I got the opportunity to start my career as an analyst, business analyst within Deloitte Consulting. And through my tenure there, I spent about 7 or 8 years at Deloitte and focused mainly within doing digital transformations, focusing on tech strategy for a lot of our Fortune 50, Fortune 100 clients, and focus mainly some work on merger and acquisition activity. So one thing that I really enjoyed about that role was every client that we worked with, or the problem that we were helping them solve, was extremely different. I never did the same project twice. There was, some similarities in terms of how you deliver projects, but the actual outcomes, the deliverables were all very different. And I think that experience really helped me understand how to think through complex problems in an array of different manners. And so that was like a really great experience. And then I had the opportunity to switch over to industry. And I went over to Google as part of their Google Cloud business unit. They were standing up a brand new organization within their customer experience department for Google Cloud customers or future customers. And they wanted to figure out how they can expand revenue and their business operations within this new umbrella. So it was a very young, small organization considering the parent of Google. So I kind of got that flair for wearing multiple hats, working within a quote unquote startup culture, but with the backing of a huge conglomerate like Google. So that was very exciting. My role there was focusing in on corporate strategy and doing business operations. So a lot of P&L management, figuring out how decisions are made in terms of where those dollars are invested, how we drive up consumption for Google Cloud and things of that nature. So those were my two sort of commercial experience in terms of professional experience on the corporate side. And then I ventured into this little project at the time where it was just myself and Ray, my co-founder, who's the chief architect behind SQS. That started around 5 years ago, where I met him for the first time. We met on a website called cofounderslab.com. It's kind of like a Tinder for entrepreneurs, where you talk about, what you're interested in, what your experience is. And he reached out because he was a very technical guy and he needed somebody who had that non-technical expertise and experience. So when he first pitched me the idea, it was just a private network of some sort. And I was like, it's interesting. How are we going to make this an actual company and tell a story that will resonate people? But we'll get into that a little bit later. But that's kind of a brief overview of my professional experience.
Very cool. I love that. And I've got to ask, so the seed was planted. You met him and started talking about this problem space vaguely. Um, what was the inspiration for you to say, "Hey, I actually like the idea," and I think you talked to it a little bit with the fact that you got a taste for what the startup world might be like
Yep.
at Google. What was the nudge that actually sent you in the direction of no, let's go build something?
Yeah, I think it's come down to um, I don't know if it's cliche or just how my childhood was, right? I'm going back down to those roots is because I always was one of those people where we're at school and I'm thinking, there's a yo-yo trend going on right now. Let me go buy some yo-yos and sell them for profit at school, right? So ever since from like a young age, and I've always been interested in just people who have started businesses, people who have great ideas, even to the level of, we can call them quote unquote, to quote Google terminology, moonshots. Like, what is our moonshot that we want to aim for? And then, yes, we can come up with a moonshot, but then let's figure out how we get to that path to achieving that 10x goal. And it's that process which really excites me. Even when I was working with some of our clients at Deloitte, focusing on the problem that they have and understanding the foundational issue. I think what helped me excel in my career over there was helping clients realize, think beyond what the foundation is. Where do you want that organization to be in 5 to 10 years, right? Do you want to be doing digital transformations? You finish one and then new technology comes in and then you go again, right? It's like this endless spin cycle, if you will, of digital transformations. And that ties back to sort of SQS. When Ray sort of pitched me this idea, I was living and breathing clients' frustrations on just endless technical debt, endless digital transformations. How do we make a business case for this multi-million-dollar project that our CFO would approve if we're not talking about security or governance and compliance and hard dollars? So when Ray pitched me this idea, it sort of all came together. And with the passion that I have for the type of work I do and where I've always wanted to achieve, with the real life experience of the conversations I was having with clients, sort of really gave me that nudge to go out and explore this more.
Love it. And thank you for sharing that. Um, and a question. So I would imagine that in the world of startups and with this, it's a lot easier to focus on like what's the intended outcome and driving toward that. I'm just personally interested. Um, what have you found is some of the most effective like thought starters or ways to navigate the conversations, even within corporates where people might be a little bit more reluctant on focusing on the end? They're like, no, we just need to focus on this one tactical thing now, and transitioning them into this bigger grandiose vision.
Yeah, no, it didn't happen overnight. Figuring out how you have those conversations, and most importantly, bring people along in the journey. If I had to sum it up in a word, I would say it's about mindset. Um, and it's a mindset shift that needs to occur when you think about these thought starters of actively engaging to broaden your horizon in what you want to focus on, right? And I'm not saying what's in front of you isn't important. Of course it is, right? It's a step, a problem needs to be solved. There's competition we need to be aware of, whatever it might be. But if you start with that mindset shift, and it took me a few years to get there, you start to focus in, but you're always thinking about the parallels, the growth trajectories, and how you end up where you want to go. Because now that I've been in this startup, and we can maybe get to this in a little bit, right? Like the number of pivots that you go through is just beyond belief, right? You think this is the channel, this is where it's going to work, but maybe the market demand isn't there. So it sort of trained me to have a mindset shift of stay where the focus is in terms of what's in front of you, but always have that long-term vision to ensure that you're able to adapt when needed. So, with an organization like Deloitte being the biggest financial organization in the world, right, they have so many different types of offerings. And the area where I was within consulting, I was fortunate enough to navigate two areas. And this kind of goes back to Andrew's question, like what made me do the nudge. Even at Deloitte, I was looking for areas where we hadn't done projects like that before, or we hadn't developed methodologies like that before. Like, what are some new revenue streams we can create for Deloitte that we can help our clients on their transformation journeys on? So I think Deloitte within its sense, I would say overall, if you're part of like the mass corporate work structure that happens, I probably wouldn't give it too high of an entrepreneurial score. However, if you look in the right places and the leaders who are working on emerging markets or what is next on the horizon, there are 100% very entrepreneurial areas within Deloitte. I would give it like a solid 8 or 9, because they are the ones driving the innovation of what's next in terms of financial services and what Deloitte provides. Google, making that change to Google, not growing up at Google and coming in as an experienced hire, that in itself was a bit of a challenge. But the meetings that I used to have on a day-to-day basis were vastly different to the meetings I would have on the Deloitte side. Google side was very data-driven. Show me the data, show me the analytics, understand these numbers, and then let's figure out about how we go to market, or how do we develop and work with our product engineers to figure out what our clients want. Mm-hmm. So from the get-go, I would say there was always a natural flair of entrepreneurship at Google. Just everywhere where you worked, every meeting that you went to, if a challenge came up, they'd be like, well, let's whiteboard it really quick and figure out how we can create this, or who do we need to speak to. So I would give Google probably a higher score just in terms of overall grade if we're talking about more entrepreneurship capabilities.
It's great to hear that from the inside, because you have these perceptions from the outside.
Sure.
Right? So it's good to hear that lives up to it.
Yeah.
And let's talk about where you're at now and what you're doing. So when you started with SQS, where were they at, or where were you all at versus where are you at now, and what was that transition like?
Wow, it's a lot to unpack because it's a 5-year journey, right? No, that's honestly a really good question, because it's kind of a sigh of relief to where we are right now, where we were 5 years ago. But like I said, it was an idea, right, where a very engineered focused individual who had experience in aviation and developing custom ERP systems had developed an architecture that was more private than what existed from the landscape in terms of 5 years ago. And the biggest feedback and even hesitancy I had before fully joining was, when you look at the private quote unquote cloud network, it's so saturated. Like, it's just so many people are doing it. Everybody's talking about a private network. How are we going to generate traction and become a player when this market is just so full? And a lot of the big players have majority of the market share. So we noodled. Conversations went on for 3 months, 6 months, testing different ideas, figuring out where we can play. So then I was like, well, people care about governance, they care about security, and all of these other applications and tech adoptions don't really focus there. And you created this idea because a customer came to you and they said, how do I secure my data on the internet? And Ray's answer was, you can't. Like, it's just not possible. So that's where his inspiration came on. Let's figuring out, how can I create a cloud, 100% cloud network that can secure data in a way that is truly, quote unquote, unhackable. And with that sort of mindset, we then started paying attention to high national security areas, innovation technologies that are on the brink of, security and encryption, and private networking and communications. And lo and behold, quantum entered the picture about 4 years ago.
Mm.
And when you're talking about quantum technologies and quantum science, they are two very different things. Quantum science is real lab work, like academics and scientists trying to figure out how a photon can travel 1,000 miles without any interruption, right? Quantum technology are what we hear in our mass audience of like IBMs of the world, who have these supercomputer quantum computers, and are architecting ways to put science into technology, but it's still not really easily adopted. So we would like running into all of these things, and we said, okay, so there are problems and challenges with adopting quantum technology. It's too expensive. And how can we get customers to buy it if they are not going to change their entire architectures to fit quantum technology, and take out classical silicon systems, right?
Yeah.
So we went through a pivot again, and we said, okay, let's figure out an architecture that can deploy quantum machines, not just computers, but quantum technologies in a hybrid model with classical silicon systems, so we can be backward compatible. How can we come up with an architecture that is layered in its approach, where transition and transformation can occur in a cyclical sense as quantum innovation is continuously improving in the science world? How do we come up with an architecture to lay out the foundation to get them started on their quantum transformation journey, and also, as soon as stuff comes out of the lab, be able to easily implement it for our clients or future clients? So those are all the problem statements that we were working with. And we finally developed an architecture where it was kind of like a aha moment for both of us. And we were like, this is exciting. Like, this is something, I think we have something here, right? And then we started having conversations. We're like, we're ready. We're like ready to go to this. And it's like me and Ray, and we had maybe one or two other team members, and we we're like, let's go apply for an accelerator. And we applied for our first accelerator, and it bombed. It completely bombed, because there were stuff that we just weren't thinking about. It wasn't in our purview. We were so focused on finding a differentiating architecture that could resonate with people. As soon as we started about quantum this, quantum that, this is how the technical excellence is, it just blew over people completely. And what we realized is there's a story problem here. We are not telling the right story. We are not communicating in a way that people aren't able to grasp something. They hear quantum, it's cool. I saw a movie, Quantum Leap or whatever it was, right? And that's about it. Like, how do we get this story in front of people to say, this is a game-changing technology, and we figured out a way to make it work for your organization? So I'd say, the past few years was pivoting, narrowing down our story, getting it to a point where we could deliver it, where people would understand it. And we are now up to a team of 15. We were a team of,
Nice.
I want to say 5 people, maybe 18 months ago. And we're now up to 15, which is so exciting, because once you crack that method to communicate and tell your story, people can get really behind it. And now that we've got an established product, we're starting our fundraising journey, and those conversations are night and day from our first accelerator pitch that we did. So yeah, that's kind of the journey that we've been on.
No, I love that, and congratulations on the transition and the acceleration in your active fundraising journey.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Yes.
Nice. Um, so what does that storytelling look like now, and maybe speak to um, what you're bringing to market and versus what the actual market and technologies, not super in depth, but just overarching as a whole, look like today.
Yeah. So for SQS, we're on a mission to revolutionize the way the world communicates and transfers data. That's probably the simplest sentence that I could sum it up in. And when we think about quantum technologies as a whole, we're focused on the practical commercial application rather than the theoretical science aspect of quantum that we hear about. We're 10 years away from adopting supercomputers. We're really focused on that practical application because we want to be the leading company to bring quantum advancements to the forefront for digital security and innovation. And I would say the architecture that we've developed, again, going towards the overcoming the adoption, the backward compatibility, all of that sort of value chains, if you will, that is where our entire focus has been on. And when we tell the story that if you think of infrastructure as a service today as an industry, right? You look at all the cloud compute and what they offer in terms of services. Mm-hmm. If you're saying to somebody that you can do the same thing with 1,000x compute power, 100, in the hundreds of percent of bandwidth reduction, all within a quantum cryptographic shell that is unpenetrable by any sort of hacker or adversarial nation trying to get intelligent information. And we can process that and then send that information to any front user device, whether that's a phone or an iPad, all across the world. And they can access it as if it's physically there on device, but the data never left the quantum cryptographic shell. People are like, you can do that? Right? And a real use case that hit home where we've been talking to some DoD customers is everything that happened with the Afghanistan withdrawal, right? There was billions and billions of computer equipment left behind. But the reason they travel with that is because the proximity of where the mission operation is happening from command and the computing technology they need to communicate sensitive information. They couldn't do that from the United States. They had to take billions of dollars of equipment. Now, if you're saying you could house that in a quantum data pod somewhere in the Pentagon and send it wherever the mission is without traveling with all that equipment, that's going to open some eyes.
Wild. No, absolutely love that. And without getting too in the weeds, and maybe this is an in the weeds question.
Yeah, that's okay. I'll try my best.
What would you say is the difference? Because there's obviously like quantum encryption technology that's out there that's not necessarily like true quantum.
Correct.
So if I were quantum curious in one of these highly regulated industries or environments, and I wanted to understand what the difference and benefit, like pros and cons of both sides of that would be, what does that look like?
Yeah. Great question. We get that all the time. So, there's the one that's available readily. People are using it, and it's definitely better than the encryption methods of today. And it's called post-quantum cryptography, right? PQC is what they call it. Honestly, in a nutshell, it's more complex math. It's a lot more complex with the keys that are developed and how do we figure out to hack or get access to the information. There is ongoing research. There's even been some challenges with PQC being hacked already by some computers. So it's something that's better than what we have now, but it's not the true answer of what we're looking for. So that's one area. There's another area around quantum computing, right? That's what we hear all the time in terms of what is that, what does it deliver, things of that nature. And quantum computing organizations focus on using the properties of qubits, right? In quick 101, it's like we transfer information today over the internet using bits. It's radio waves, it's wave-based technology, ones and zeros. Qubits is zeros and ones and everything in between, and it's point-to-point transmission. So it's not wave-based, it's light-based. So quantum computing uses the unique properties of qubits to perform calculations much faster than regular computers. But if you want to adopt a quantum computer for your organization and you're trying to send information from quantum computer to quantum computer, you'll need one on either side. And that's just not feasible, right? It's just not adoptable in today's market. There are things that you can get that are commercially available called quantum key distribution machines, QKD. And, we did a demo at Space Symposium in Colorado Springs of a quantum key distribution machine sending a photon from one machine to another. Now that in itself is great, but is that true quantum communication of trying to transmit data and protect it at the chip and motherboard level? No, that's not going to answer your question, right? So that's why with SQS, when we were looking at all of these things, it's like we need to start from ground zero. We need to build an architecture at the infrastructure level that can take technologies that exist today and make them better using a classical internet model where we can start that transformation. And our first goal of this infrastructure build is secured communications. That is the fundamental level, because if you can't communicate securely, there's no point developing a secured quantum cloud or things. We'll just be in the same boat with all these other companies who have tried to create, a private secure network. So that's the approach we've taken, where we're starting from the infrastructure level and building from the ground up.
Okay. So it sounds like you're building the infrastructure in the same way that, or it's reminiscent of how it was done in the early 1900s, or you're learning your lessons from that, crisscrossing phone line from house to operator.
Yes. Yeah. 100%. And the luxury we have, right, is a lot of those infrastructure lessons learned, there's like stuff we can leverage. Like when we say we want to build a global quantum communication network, people are like, well, are you going to have to relay fiber everywhere? I mean, we're talking billions of dollars, right? And again, it comes down to the architecture and the distribution model. The answer is no, we don't need to relay new fiber. Can we leverage some existing fiber? 100%. Will there be some fiber that just isn't capable to carry photons? Yes, 100%. But when we use a small scale, high frequency model in our distribution, we can eliminate those things and leverage existing infrastructure and then build new infrastructure where it's needed, where current gaps exist.
What is the next step in the infrastructure?
Yeah, so attending Space Symposium was a huge catalyst for us because we always knew if we want to do global distribution, satellites have to come into the picture at some point. And we have been exploring with organizations. We can do the quantum communication piece. We can't build satellites, right? It's just not feasible for us to do that. So we knew space was an area that we really needed to focus in on if we were going to establish a footprint for global networking. So we've been working with some organizations who build actual housing infrastructure shells or pods, if you will. And they can launch them into space for their customers. And if their customers are looking for computing power, if they're looking for communication, right? We're working on a partnership program with them on how can SQS be the preferred partner for all your customers seeking that when you put it into space, because eventually we will need to buy hundreds of those pods and put them into space so we can have a geographic global network sending optical laser links to transfer photons back and forth, right? So we took that first step of exploring space. And right now we're in early stage conversations with how we could potentially go to market with this organization. And most importantly, how do we demo something like this for future customers or DoD customers interested in secured quantum communication in space.
And on that note, a question, like what capability or builds do you have today? So you've started these exploratory conversations, which is
Yes.
awesome.
Yeah.
What do you have today and what's up next, right? So flash forward 6 to 12 months, closed your fundraising round,
Yeah.
foot is hitting the pedal
Yes.
on building what's next. What does today
Yeah.
versus tomorrow look like?
Perfect. So the first thing that I would say to that is with our current fundraise search and active search that we're doing right now, there is a part of it where it is to do a demonstration production build of what we call a quantum safe environment. And that talks about the infrastructure as a service example that I gave, the compute power, all within a cryptographic shell with proving the secured communication aspect. So that, given on when fundraising hits, we've calculated on our roadmap would be about 9 months. So that is something that we would like to do now from a growth capacity on like, how do we grow and how do we build in terms of what next? We've always thought that a mega region model is how we would distribute our architecture. So essentially, we would like to create 3 quantum data pods. We call them pods because they're not a typical size of a data center where you just have acres and acres of data center space. You can just take one of those moving storage pods and build a quantum data pod in it, right? So our goal is to build 3 of those pods over the continental United States in a mega region model. So then we can show from, at least from a United States perspective, how the networking and communication aspect come together. And we have the scope of distance when you have 3 pods versus just the 1. The first one can prove that it works. The 3 one is the next stage, which would be 18 to 24 months from when we get funded, I would say, on our roadmap.
And that shows how they work together.
How they work together, yeah, over a distance period, right? Because one of the challenges is you can only send a quantum signal, 50 to 100 miles without having the need for quantum repeaters, right? So we have a differentiated architecture to overcome that issue, and the three data pod model would prove that.
So you use the term mega region.
Yes.
What is defined as a region? Like what's the actual approximate area of coverage? And then what is a mega region?
Yeah, so great question. So if I was to just take what our moonshot is, real brief, right? We would like to have approximately 2,000 quantum data pods all across the country. And when we say mega region, we're looking at regions, maybe state-based, maybe multiple state-based, but mainly state-based right now, where there is a need for high frequency, I always get this wrong, low scale, high frequency model of private quantum communication network needs within a region. And a perfect example of that is Utah. There is the United States Air Force, Hill Air Force Base software engineering group that we're in discussions with about building a private quantum network for 3 Air Force bases. And that would not only be within the Utah region, but slightly broader than that, where we would have to operate these networks independently from what our commercial network would be, right? Because it's DoD, it's national security. So where there are industries such as Utah, like aerospace and defense, there is a huge sort of technology and commercial aspect where there is a high drive of those data pods where we would build. We would define that as a mega region. And we're thinking 3 mega regions across the United States to get that population density and coverage is how we're thinking about our rollout model.
Very cool. Love that.
Very,
and
very
thank you for the information.
Sure.
So you're talking about the DoD, which makes a lot of sense. And I think it's a great example. And I know we've had some conversations about this, but I've got kind of two questions. First being, what other industries are considering this technology or quantum curious that you're talking to?
Yeah, I would even take a step back and I would say it's anybody in any industry who is security paranoid, right? Because more and more, and the Ukrainian war is kind of the stark reminder of the reality of like how much cyber warfare has an influence on real time world wars in today's world. Like the amount of hacking over networking, sensing, communications being hacked over the internet has just been hugely come to the forefront, where we've defined it as the security of nations is at risk if we don't address this issue. And in the commercial world, people are talking more and more about this spin cycle that I was referring to about digital transformation. And it's like, how can we free up technical debt and build an actual business case that doesn't allow our data to be hacked? We hear about consumer and commercial technologies or organizations being hacked all the time. And, they're taking somewhat quote unquote band-aid solutions to figure out the near-term focus, like I was talking about. But how do you build something to kind of get out of this continuous spin cycle? So anybody who's security paranoid, I would say, of course, DoD agencies, national security, but more importantly, financial services. I mean, that in itself in governance and compliance and risk is huge. Life sciences and healthcare with patient information and hospitals and the networks they have. Legal is another one. So there's a lot of commercial appetite. Another one is like the gaming industry, like casinos and their infrastructure and what they are trying to protect. So there is a huge outlook, an optimistic outlook, I would say, from both the commercial and DoD space.
Perfect. And that leads well to my follow-up. And you might have touched on this a little bit with casinos, but what other industries have you not heard that are considering this, that maybe should start thinking about it sooner than later?
Yeah, it's a great question. If I had to think about it for a second, I would say, with the traction that we've received when we had our story down and we started it, we got accepted into our first accelerator, the automatic traction was DoD, because we're talking about securing something and keeping it safe. And the DoD is going to be all about that because, national security is very important and the DoD is the main driver behind that. When we think about the security paranoid industries that I was talking about, there are natural segues where organizations, and this could be applicable to any industry, but right now with my sort of pulse, if I had to say a word on the market, I would say it's the tech, media, and even telecommunications industry. Because when you think about telecommunications and you think about infrastructure and you think about tech from a data consumption perspective, there's a lot of other value chains than just security that our platform can provide. If you think about the whole boom around AI and Gen AI right now, right? There was a Goldman Sachs article released like a few months back. This AI boom by 2030 is going to use up 160% of our data centers consumption capabilities.
Wow.
By 2030. So who's thinking about that? Who is thinking about, we need to rethink how we think about data centers and how we distribute consumption and compute power. Our data pods tell that value as well because they are low in scale and they can compute at a higher rate. Therefore, consumption could be increased without putting too much pressure on our data centers and our power grids right now. And that's a whole nother value chain of industries like the tech industry who are playing in AI should be considering thinking about how they would change up their data consumption model to support frontier technologies like Gen AI and whatever's next to come.
And you mentioned energy usage.
Yeah.
One thing that came to my mind, and something that you read about in the horror stories of the future of compromise or warfare, is hacking in general, right? What about the energy infrastructure that we have and protecting that kind of infrastructure from being penetrated. Is that something that's also to be considered? Is there
100%. That's a great point. And one of the examples that we've drawn from our platform to have like a real day example of like what's the goal here. We sort of described ourselves sometimes as a utility company, right? When you think about power grids and how they operate, essentially that is what we are building from for our quantum network. It's more of a utility that you turn on a switch and people don't even realize what's happening on in the background. You turn a light on, the light turns on. Nobody thinks about where it came from or the energy, right? But if there are infrastructures that are critical dependent, that can have an actual human life impact, like you said, like electricity, water, things of that nature. 100%. That would be a fantastic use case that we would love to work organizations who are thinking about that. And we could, love to have just like a workshop session and be like, tell us more on like how you currently protect this, how your infrastructure works, and could this be a possible avenue for you to think about those? So that's a great point.
Very cool. And I know this is a really big problem space, and y'all are just at the beginning of this journey with a tremendous amount of progress. So I'm really excited to see how it advances. But let's say there are others that are working in this space as well in some regard. What does optimal collaboration potentially look like?
That's actually a really timely question, because when you are talking about building a quantum network platform, you can't do everything yourself. There is just no way that, unless you become like an alphabet of the world eventually, right, that you would have the resources where you can control every aspect of your rollout. So partnership is actually one of the main attributes of our business model. We need partners in hardware, software. How are we going to deploy these technologies for organizations and implement once this picks up? We will need digital service providers to go out and implement this technology. We will need sustainment organizations to, once it's been implemented, how do you continuously operate and sustain the innovation roadmap of your quantum transformation journey? We're not ourselves a 100% quantum hardware company. Like I said, we're focused on commercialization. Yes, there are aspects where we would need to co-develop, like when we're talking about quantum encryption at the chip and motherboard level, we would need to work for it with a chip fab organization to bring in and develop quantum chips. So the encryption is all the way at the chip level of that infrastructure. So partnership is a key integral part of what we're trying to build and how we take this to scale.
Do you consider yourself, when talking to VCs or other possible partnerships, do you discuss yourself as hard tech, software, or do you play both sides?
Both sides. Yeah, definitely both sides. And the goal is, right, yes, our initial ask and raise is CapEx heavy, but that in itself turns into an asset, right? Once you build the model and you build your data pods, that in itself becomes like the network. And we have a product that we're calling a quantum ecosystem. Once you build an ecosystem of partners, vendors, affiliates, for organizations, for industries, and everybody is operating at machine speed and then this quantum network, speed to going to market or development or implementing new technologies and not having to worry about security and compliance and things of that nature, is like mind-boggling when I think about it. But the fact that we are working on something to achieve that end state, it becomes definitely a play. To your point, Chris, it's hardware with software, and it's both.
Very cool. And in that note, one of the questions that I had lined up is, what is one thing that you'd like to share with some of the fellow founders that are in this space, that are maybe just starting a little bit earlier on?
Yeah. What advice would I give? Solve real problems is what I would say. Like That's one thing that comes to mind, like, and vet it like 100 times, right? When this first idea started, it was just a private network that we wanted to build. And we weren't thinking about so much the broader solution aspect of what are the real world challenges that demonstrate clear value to customers. When you want something to work so bad, you focus in on how do we get this architecture right? Like, this is so fundamental to what we're doing. Yes. But if you can't demonstrate that to a clear value of a future customer or an investor or a partner, where are you spending your efforts and your focus? So I would say solve real problems. One thing that I wish we had done early on is form strategic partnerships. There are a multitude of conferences, local events happening in every major city across the United States and across the world. Go attend, put yourself out there. You never know who you're going to meet. When strike up a conversation, and this is what I'm working on. Form strategic partnerships as early as you can, because if the biggest thing for us is when we started doing that, there are so many other founders in the same position that might be working on an area that you're thinking about, but it's later on your roadmap, or vice versa, or whatever it is. So try and form those strategic partnerships really early on. And I would say focus on team. When you're working on an idea, you can't do everything yourself, right? I mean, and there's different levels, right? It's different from saying, I want to build an application for a Tetris game, and it's going to have, 2 colors, that's it, right? Like, yes, 1 or 2 founders could probably develop a demo, go to that, develop a marketing strategy, and try and solve it. That being like one scale. The other side of the scale is we're trying to build essentially a quantum network that might one day eventually replace our current internet. And when you're working on something so complex, ask for help. Like, find people who are passionate with you, who want to benefit society for a greater goal and have an impact on the world in a way, like I said, has that similar mindset as you. Try and focus on surrounding yourself with team members who can support your journey and maybe even join it. So I'd say those are the 3 areas that I would probably give advice on.
Epic. And then what about investors that are looking to invest in this technology, in this industry? What are some thoughts or considerations you might pass along to them?
Very timely question. So the biggest thing I would say is mindset 100%. There are VCs that, you have conversations with, and they have their own portfolios, their priority areas they want to invest in. A lot of thinking, strategic thinking goes into that. There are a lot of SaaS-based VCs. And this kind of goes to the investor and if you're a founder question, but I'll try and tackle both, is do your research on what it is you're trying to invest in. There are a lot of startups. Are they deep tech? Then go speak to a deep tech investor, right? Like, yes, you can speak to like SaaS VCs and stuff. They'll give you great advice, but it's a different model. Deep tech is a long-term play. And that's what I would say on VCs who are looking to invest in quantum, place a bet on quantum. There are different aspects. There are quantum sensing, there's quantum timing, there's quantum computing. Focus on how do you develop or invest in a company that focuses on building a quantum ecosystem in order to maximize and get the most out of the technology application. Again, focusing on a longer term investment horizon. There is a huge CapEx component for any quantum hardware technology. Build is going to be the first few years. But if you are long-term minded and you have a need to think about frontier technologies and you want to drive the next horizon of your fund, what is your goal of that when you're thinking about deep tech? Are you thinking about truly revolutionary, game-changing technology? Or are you thinking about technology that can serve a purpose with current trends, i.e., are you making a technology that can hit AI, right? Everyone's talking about it, but I've not heard conversations or VCs taking a different outlook and saying, so you have all of these value chains, but you're saying you can solve the data consumption model, even though that's not like our biggest value point. Yes, that is. So my ask would be to VCs to keep an open mind, be long-term focused, and focus on the team that the founding team has gathered. They have this vision, they have this moonshot. Have they got the team to do it? Right? Can they commercialize quantum technology if that's truly their goal? Speaking on behalf of SQS, like, do we have the players to make your better reality? And those are the areas that come to mind initially for VCs.
And then maybe you could touch on this a little bit. What about the VCs that have a hard time? I've heard this recently with some venture friends of ours, placing these much longer timeline moonshots into shorter timelines that actually make sense for them to be quote unquote VC investable.
I would say when you're working with startups who have a long-term horizon, have them break it down. Say, what are your milestones in year one? Like, what are you hoping to achieve? Is it just proof of concept? Will you have something to demo? Like, work backwards on like, this is your moonshot. Okay, it's going to take 5 years for you to build and, streams of revenue to come in. But there are many sort of success or quick wins along that 5-year roadmap that might even have them pivot to other areas, right? Any startup, once you get funded, you have your first milestone. How many have ended up doing what their actual moonshot was versus go and pivot and do something else?
Yep.
You just don't know, because so many values can come from going through that development process. And one of the things that I think we've internalized is, yes, this is a long-term play, but if you can prove out success at every year on the roadmap, a wise investor would listen to that.
And one thing that we look for in companies that have these longer timelines is chunking it up to kind of a stair-step model where you can really drive that dynamism in the business model, drive revenue sooner than later.
Correct.
And that's one of the things that helps us take those strategic positions that it's very, very future looking. So definitely keep a lookout for that. And any notable future technology company should be thinking in that kind of way, because it'll lead to the pivots and listening to what the market needs are, and probably open perspective that may have not been considered before. So that's
100%. That's great insight.
And then last one, what are some thoughts and considerations that you might say to potential customers, either about your product, your service?
I would say
people that are quantum curious.
Yeah, quantum curious thought leaders in true transformation, folks who are thinking about even bottom line revenue, like how do we cut costs and increase bottom line revenue while also having like a fantastic team without laying off workforce and things of that nature, right? Educate yourself, like reach out. There's no harm in having a conversation with a company to understand and walk through the limitations in your mind of what quantum technology can potentially provide. Inform yourself, have a conversation on what's out there, because as a very small startup that we are, it's hard for us to educate the masses and have a distribution channel where we can just be like, this is what you can do, and have every single person look at it. But if you're quantum curious or security curious, or, hey, Zain talked about data consumption and AI reaching 160% by 2030, like reach out, have those conversations with people working on interesting tech. I would say analyze and prioritize what is your area of focus. Are you focused on security? Are you focused on a technology need or a revamp of your IT operations due to a burning platform or a burning need that is driving from competition or market or whatever? Figure out where your priorities are. Like I said, focus on what's foundational. And if you want to start, we call it, there's the digital transformation journey. We're marking ours as quantum transformation. Do you want to be an early adopter where you can implement hybrid technologies with your current architectures to lay that quantum transformation roadmap? So when the need comes and quantum is absolutely booming, are you going to be reactive, or have you been proactive in awaiting that disruption and having your technology landscape at the ready for that sort of adoption and disruption? So those are the two main areas that come to mind.
To play the other side of the coin, an interesting question came up. When should somebody kind of indicate a flag, or maybe even dequalify themselves from considering technology like this? When might it not be a good fit?
It's a great question. I mean, I don't know. It's like what we're working on touches, when you think about what you do on your day-to-day job, and this could be for any organization, like imagine a world where you're not using digital, or you're not using cloud, or you're not using the internet. Like there's so many touch points of what we're building. It's hard to envision not a need for that. Now, yes, you might not need your very own quantum data pod with lasers pointing to every single office location of yours, right? That might just not be a need or the privatization that you need. But would you want to use quantum infrastructure as a service to have utmost compute power, security, bandwidth reduction, all of those great points, just to run your system, right? Like when you think about what Google Cloud provides and AWS provides, like they are huge consumption products. So, and a lot of organizations use that, right? This is the better alternate that could probably be something at the same price. So it's hard for me to see an organization where they would say there's not some aspect of some of this platform that we wouldn't use.
So this ties back into your do the proper research, and even dips into the advice that you were giving founders: solve real problems.
Yeah. Yeah.
So clearly identify the problem that you're trying to solve, and then do the research in accordance with that.
Yeah, 100%.
Cool. Love it. Chris, do you have any closing thoughts you want to wrap us up with?
I think what you have on your hands is fantastic. What do you want the world to know? What do you want to the next, say, 24, 48 hours to be like here?
If you are at any space in your mind or interest in terms of what your passion is, what your company does, what your portfolio goals are, if you want to take a bet on a frontier technology to advance human society, to advance society in general, how we transfer data, how we think about it, how we communicate using all these digital channels, and you've always wondered or been curious about quantum, or even how to further enhance and secure AI, SQS and other folks maybe in the quantum realm are worth having conversations with, because problems that you're trying to solve in those areas with current technologies might be roadblocks or resources not being spent in terms of where you could think about the next 5-10 years and where the digital world is going. So I would say be aware. If you're curious, reach out. And if you're thinking about a company that has re-architected our digital topology of architectures in a way that can be adopted with real world systems, come talk to SQS.
Love it. And thank you so much for all the perspective and insights that you shared. And even more so, thank you so much for working on what you are. It's very exciting, and the infrastructure is needed.
That's amazing. No, I really appreciate the opportunity. This is some great conversation, and yeah, just looking forward to having more and driving SQS forward.
Cool. So to all of our listeners, we'll make sure to have contact information, the best way to reach out to Zain and the team to ask more questions, get more technical. we were actually working with them and connecting them with other individuals in the space. And when we were even doing our due diligence, went through that process, and they whipped up a white paper that they've got. So we'll figure out a way where we can make that easily available for you. Or it might just be a direct connection to Zain, and they'll provide that as part of that. So we'll make sure to include that and all of the stuff below. And actually, if Zain, if somebody wants to connect with you and connect with the team, where's the best place to do that?
Yeah, LinkedIn, 100%, Zain Premji, or just shoot me an email. It's really easy. It's zain@sqs.world.
And that's ZAIN.
Yes, ZAIN at sqs.world.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Well, first interview of a lot of very interesting ones that we've got coming up. So thank you for being the inaugural conversation.
That was a great conversation.
Yeah, it definitely was, and enlightening for sure. So stay tuned, stay posted, like, subscribe, all the normal stuff that people tell you to do when following, so that you can stay in touch. And then we'll get this out, and I'm ready for the next one. So good morning, good night, good evening to you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Peace.